Hello everybody and welcome back to Movie Night, and what we'll be doing for the next few weeks are spooky movies because it's October! The best month of the year, the best season of the year, the best holiday is coming up. I am so excited. I love horror stuff, I love Halloween, as everyone can tell. So, we are going to begin with the most influential horror movies, at least according to me. This is going to be very opinionated. I did go and look at some general lists of most influential movies. There's going to be a couple that everyone will say, obviously, that is influential, that is the best. But I also included and excluded some based on my own personal tastes. I also wanted to try and get a lot of foreign movies in there. I am from America, so the majority of these movies are American, not because I think that they are objectively better, but because that's what I've been exposed to. I have seen some foreign horror movies. I've included quite a lot on this list. If there are any other foreign horror movies out there, please let me know. I would love to go and check them out. Without further ado, let's get into it, because there are 55 movies on this list. 55! I'm just going to very briefly hit the high points, and we're gonna breeze all through them, alright? Alright. 1920, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. It is a German expressionism piece directed by Robert Wein, or I guess Vine, I don't know German. It deals with unreliable narrator, surrealistic horror, uncertain environment of the set, and just the ambiance really gives a claustrophobic, just off feeling to the piece. 1921, The Phantom Carriage. It was directed by Victor... It's very Scandinavian. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce it. It's kind of Christmas Carol-y in that the main character has to relive all of his sins before he gets shipped off to hell. And the whole riding around in the Grim Reaper's carriage reminds me slightly of Darby O'Gill and the Little People. By the way, the movie The Seventh Seal was actually inspired by The Phantom Carriage, and it's such an inspirational movie that Victor, my man with the unpronounceable last name, was actually an MGM contract director. 1922, Nosferatu, directed by F.W. Murnau. It's considered the Citizen Kane of horror movies, and it was really scary. It took the sex right out of Dracula. In fact, the Bram Stoker estate was so pissed off by Nosferatu that they sued the studio that produced it. They bankrupted the studio that produced it. But Count Orlok still lingers. 1922, Häxan. It's a Scandinavian movie, so again, I don't know. It is a silent film directed by Benjamin Christensen, and it's not really a film so much as a 4-part essay about the horrors of the Inquisition and witchcraft, and it's a thing. It's a very interesting thing. They go over a lot of real iconography and images and texts, so it is a chilling documentary of just what people thought and did back then in regards to witches. 1931, Dracula. And this is Bela Lugosi's Dracula because the original is always the best. This is directed by Todd Browning, and come on, it's Dracula. Everybody knows this, everybody's seen it. And if you're thinking, oh yes, I've seen Dracula, but it's in color, then no, you have not seen the real Dracula. Need to see Bela Lugosi's Dracula, do it. 1932, Freaks. If you've ever heard that one of us chant, it's from this movie. This movie was directed by Todd Browning, the same guy that directed Bela Lugosi's Dracula. But this movie ended his career, and if you're wondering if that was due to the fact that the movie sucked, you're wrong. This movie was so scary for 1930s audiences that they sued the studio in protest. This one lady sued MGM over The Freaks because she said that the movie caused her to miscarry her child. So I guess that would put a damper on anyone's resume. 1941, The Wolfman. This is Lon Chaney Jr.'s Wolfman, directed by George Wagner, and it is the first instance of a werewolf being on film, or the werewolf genre. It pretty much started the whole thing, and the Bela Lugosi Dracula and the Lon Chaney Jr. werewolf, the original Frankenstein, Creature from the Black Lagoon, The Mummy, these are all the classic movies. These are the initial, original horror movie classics that everybody needs to see. It's a prerequisite for being human. 1943, I Walked with a Zombie. Look at this man. Look at this absolute unit. I don't know if those women are 5 feet tall or this man is 8, but just... So it's directed by Jacques Tourneur. It's a wonderful look at other cultures' horror, specifically Caribbean voodoo, and it really showcases what happens when one culture tries to co-opt another, and just the horror that can unfurl with the mashing of ideologies. 1960 Psycho. It's Hitchcock. We finally hit Hitchcock. Thank you, Lord. Everybody has seen this movie. If you think you haven't seen this movie, you're wrong. You've seen this movie. The shower scene is from this movie. The sound effect is from this movie. So yes, you have seen this movie. It is so embedded in our cultural fabric. And if you've actually never seen it all the way through, please do. It is a wonderful psychological pseudoscience mumbo jumbo. You will never understand the motivation of the characters. They're all batshit crazy, but that doesn't matter. It is chilling to the bone. It is such a... Just watch it. 1960 Black Sunday. This Italian horror film is based off of Gogol's novel Vi. It is a wonderful example of Italian Gothic horror, but it was banned in the UK based off the violence in the film. To be fair, the entire movie does involve a woman who got inquisitioned back in ye olden times and burned at the stake as a witch, and her coming back hundreds of years later to enact some much needed revenge. So don't watch this if you are of the faint of heart, because... 1963 The Birds. It's pretty much the one thing that Hitchcock is most known for. Yes, Psycho, but also The Birds. I think everyone is required to watch The Birds in high school. If not watch The Birds, read The Birds. And if you've read The Birds, watch the movie. If you've watched it, then you need to read the book. I mean, what would happen if nature just decided to evict us all from it? That's what this movie is about. It is an unwinnable war against the planet. And I mean, getting pecked to death by birds sounds like one of the most awful ways to go. 1964 Mask of the Red Death. Directed by Roger Corman, based off of Poe's short story Mask of the Red Death. And I'm really surprised they managed to get a movie out of this, considering how the actual short story is like 10 pages long. It just involves a guy walking through a masquerade and just killing everybody because he's death, I think. It's Poe. It's kind of really hard to understand what he was on about. He was drunk for most of the time and marrying his first cousin. We're just gonna stop talking about that. But in this movie adaptation, the main character is played by Vincent Price, which if that hasn't convinced you to watch it right now, then I don't know what's wrong with you. 1967 Vi. Directed by Konstantin Yershov and Georgy Kropatchev. I am so sorry. This is a direct adaptation of the Gogol book that Black Sunday was based off of, but this one is incredibly different than its Italian counterpart. Firstly, it's Russian, if you couldn't tell by the names of the directors. It actually has the wonderful credit of being one of the few movies made in Soviet-era Russia, and instead of going with the whole Inquisition torture porn thing, it has a slightly Guillermo del Toro-esque monsters coming to claim the soul of the main characters, and well, if you've ever seen things like Pan's Labyrinth, you'll understand. 1968 Night of the Living Dead. George Romero, you visionary. This movie was definitely a landmark title in the zombie genre, and interestingly enough, it has overtones of race issues in it. Romero said that this was completely accident, but based off the race of the main character and the fact that the zombie apocalypse happens after a civil rights outrage in the country, it has a accidental theming of race inequality in this very, very influential black and white cult zombie apocalypse movie. It's definitely worth a watch. 1973 The Exorcist. Directed by William Friedkin, many people, including myself sometimes, considers this to be the most influential horror movie. And it's mainly because, just like The Freaks, it had people rioting. They were passing down aisles, they were bolting from the theater. There's just something about the little girl element. No one ever wants anything bad to happen to the kids, and no one wants a kid's head to spin 360 multiple times, crab walk down a staircase, throw up pea soup, and spew tons of vulgarities. Reagan, you have to wash your mouth out with soap, young lady. Oof. Also, the set of The Exorcist was apparently cursed, and a lot of people got hurt and or died, much like the Scottish play. 1973 and 2006, The Wicker Man. Not the beast! Yes, The Bees, thank you Nicolas Cage. So the first instance of this movie was directed by Robert Hardy, and the remake was by Neil LaBute. And it takes place in a cult in England, and the second Wicker Man, I think it's also in England. It's been a while. I only really watched it to see Nicolas Cage yell about the bees. The whole point of this movie is the cult. Much like Midsummer, which happened much more recently, it's all about the surrealist, can you trust anybody on this small, isolated piece of land? And yes, the bees. 1974, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Did you know that Leatherface is based off of a real serial killer? Ed Gein. Gene? He's a serial killer, so I don't care if I mispronounce his last name. It was directed by Tobe Hooper, or Tobe. I do care if I mispronounce his name because this movie is a slasher classic. It really cemented the whole genre and also introduced us to the concept of the lone heroine, the girl who manages to survive everything. Think Ripley. We will get back to Ripley. 1975, Jaws. It's Steven Spielberg. It's Jaws. We all know about this movie. This is the movie that made you afraid to even take a bath. This is the movie that made my aunt pathologically afraid of sharks even to this day. I mean, I don't blame her. They have a lot of teeth. 1976, Carrie. Directed by Brian De Palma, based off of a Stephen King book. It is definitely one of the most twisted coming-of-age stories, but for anyone who has seen them, because there are a couple, I'd say that she really deserves the, revenge at the end. I don't mind that she went all Jean Grey on everybody. I think they deserved it. She had a very awful life. And that mom. Who that mom? 1977, Eraserhead. Directed by David Lynch, this is going to be the most surreal, most confusing, most stomach-turning thing you will ever see. I do not understand the plot. No one understands the plot. Look up on YouTube Eraserhead, and you will wonder when you were roofied, because you'd have to be seeing what you're seeing. It is a weird movie, but you should definitely watch it because it's something to be experienced. Like the Beatles' Yellow Submarine movie. That is also a trip. 1977 and 2018, Suspiria. The first one was directed by Dario Argento and the remake was Luca Guadagnino? I apologize for butchering those names. This is an Italian horror movie which takes place in Germany, and it features some very surreal body horror-ish, Germanic, witchy... The 2018 version is beautifully done and definitely scarier than the original. The original is far more surreal with a very bold color palette. So depending on if you want to see vibrant psychedelic colors or just people twisting themselves into pretzels because of black magic, pick your poison. 1978, Halloween. Yep, that one. We all know that one. It is the slasher movie. It is the slasher movie. Thank you, John Carpenter, for bringing us the quintessential, the linchpin granddaddy of all slasher movies. 1979, Alien. Directed by Ridley Scott, it has all the fear of being stuck in a completely inescapable situation with one of the coolest monsters ever. I love Alien. Out of all the movies on this list, it is probably my favorite. I love this movie so much. 1979, The Brood. Done by Canadian director David Cronenberg. This is body horror on an interesting level. It reminds me of one episode of Supernatural about changelings, and if any of you know what I'm talking about, you know that you're in for a ride. Check it out if you want to be incredibly grossed out by children and mothers and just everyone in general. Have fun! 1980, The Shining. This is the other movie that people consider to be the most influential, tied with The Exorcist, and again, I most of the time agree. Directed by Stanley Kubrick, because this is pretty much the one thing that everybody knows Stanley Kubrick has done. It is based off of a Stephen King novel, and come on, it's The Shining. You don't need me to summarize the plot or why it's good. It's The Shining. 1980, Friday the 13th. Directed by Sean S. Cunningham, this is the other quintessential slasher movie, and boy did it put camp into campy 80s horror. Pun intended. 1981, An American Werewolf in London. Yay, we're back to werewolves. They really don't show up that much. This movie is a horror comedy and there's only going to be a couple of these on this list. The reason I include them is because just the wonderful mashup of American and London just culture and ideas. It was directed by John Landis, and this has one of the best wearable transformations ever. I mean, it's from the 80s, so it's a little dated, but it definitely is a classic and a linchpin in the genre. 1981, Evil Dead. This is one of the other horror comedies because there's no way that you can watch Evil Dead now and think that it is scary. I didn't include the remake that was done in the 2000s in this list because, in my opinion, it's such a departure from the original. The remake is legitimately scary and includes a lot of pull air in through your teeth and curl up in the fetal position, just ouch moments. But what really makes the original Evil Dead enjoyable, at least for me, is the fact that it's fun to watch. It is not scary, it's very campy, but they play into that so hard that it ignited a genre. I mean, the original Evil Dead in my mind is the progenitor of campy, over-the-top, you know it's supposed to be stupid horror that so many things have just built their legacy off of. Even video games. Think of Until Dawn. If you go into that with the mindset of it's cabin in the woods / Evil Dead and just have fun with it, it's just so good. Also, Evil Dead is directed by Sam Raimi, but everybody knew that. 1982 Poltergeist, directed by Tobe Hooper, the same guy that did Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I'm still mispronouncing his name, I'm so sorry. Once again, there's something about the little kids. You don't want anything bad to happen to the little kids. This movie made Static just instantly terrifying, and beyond that, this movie is probably the best argument for cremation in any media. Don't build your house on top of cemeteries, folks, it's a bad idea. And disrespectful. 1982, The Thing, directed by John Carpenter. It has the same vibe as Alien. You're stuck in an isolated area with a thing that wants to eat your face, except instead of being in space, you're in the Arctic. And instead of a lovely Geiger, six-limbed black bug-like thingamajig, it's an amorphous that actually, I believe, was made out of bubblegum? Or a bubblegum-like substance because they wanted something really gooey and gross. So good on them for being creative with their tools. 1984, A Nightmare on Elm Street, directed by Wes Craven. This movie's hook comes from a similar place as the last one, that you can never escape. Except you're not in space or you're not in the Arctic. The monster comes for you in your sleep, and you can never not sleep, so you can never escape the monster. This also falls into the whole 1980s lovely slasher genre, and it's just wonderful to see all these teenagers get absolutely mulched for their stupid decisions. Like young Johnny Depp, he gets absolutely creamed in this movie. 1986, Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, directed by John McNaughton. It has a somewhat Criminal Minds-y bent that it looks at serial killers in a very realistic light, and that's where all the goosebumps comes from. Knowing that this could definitely happen, and maybe has. At least that's what I think whenever I watch Criminal Minds, that this probably has happened or is currently happening to some poor soul on the earth, and The interesting thing about this movie is that it was shot on 16mm film in less than a month for only $110,000, and that may sound like a lot of money, but most movies have a much bigger budget. To be this good and this chilling with such limited resources, it is MacGyver to the max. I have no idea how they managed to make this movie work. 1986, The Fly, directed by David Cronenberg, starring Jeff Goldblum. Everybody loves Jeff Goldblum. This is a slightly Frankenstein-y movie about a scientist that just everything goes wrong for this poor man. It definitely involves body horror and transformation and just, it's gross, but it's gross in such a good way. 1990, Jacob's Ladder, directed by Adrian Lyne. This has a unreliable narrator, mainly due to the fact that he is a Vietnam War veteran, and the horrifying hallucinations that he suffers throughout this movie is enough to make anyone fear their own mind and what can happen after the traumas of, like, say, war. 1991, The Silence of the Lambs. Hello, Clarice is actually wrong. He never says that in the entire movie. The actual line is, good evening, Clarice. And also, did you know that sherbet is not actually sherbet, it is sherbet, and we just added an R in there? Directed by Jonathan Demme. If one serial killer wasn't enough, now we have two. One that eats people and one that makes people into clothing. So, criminal minds all around. 1992, Candyman. Directed by Bernard Rose, it features a boogeyman-esque monster, and it is based off a book by Clive Barker. Interestingly enough, the Clive Barker book takes place in Liverpool and focuses on classism, whereas the movie takes place in Chicago and focuses on racism. It is definitely an urban legend-y, Bloody Mary-y kind of story, but everybody has heard about those, so everybody can relate to it in some way, which is why it is really creepy. 1993, The Nightmare Before Christmas. Oh, this is such a good movie. It is actually not directed by Tim Burton, surprisingly enough. It was directed by Henry Selick, with the music done by Danny Elfman, and Tim Burton was just the producer. He also came up with the visual style and the story of it, but he didn't direct the thing. And did you know that Danny Elfman, besides creating the entire score, is actually Jack Skellington when he sings, because no one could match the singing that Danny Elfman wanted, so he just did it himself. I don't have to talk about this movie, do I? Everyone knows this movie. The interesting thing is that it is one of the best examples of stop motion animation. Think of all of the stop motion animation movies that you've seen. Now, how many of those aren't Tim Burton? Moving on. 1996, Scream. Directed by Wes Craven, the same guy that did Nightmare on Elm Street, this is a satirical view of slasher movies that Wes Craven has done before, which is why he's so good at messing with it. This falls into all of the cliches. The characters do everything that they are supposed to do in a slasher movie, and it is a creepy, but still satirical view of the genre. It's amazing that it took off so well, but people do love satire. 1996 and 2002, The Ring, or Ringu as it was called originally. The original was done by Hideo Nakata, that was probably wrong, and the remake was done by Gore Verbinski. The interesting thing about The Ring is that it's the first J-horror, or American reproduction of a Japanese horror movie, and it paved the way for many others in the same genre, such as the movie that I find the absolute scariest and the one that tormented me the most in my childhood and definitely scarred me, The Grudge. The Ring gets on this list for trailblazing an entire genre of nightmare fuel. 1999, The Blair Witch Project. This one trailblazed its own genre, the found footage horror genre, which includes things like Paranormal Activity. The only thing I dislike about this movie is the fact that it makes me want to vomit out of my eyes due to the awful camera shake. I hate the camera shake so much that I even decided to verbify it as Blair Witch Cam whenever I see anyone's iPhone footage being all bouncy. But still, it is absolutely terrifying because that bounciness and the fact that it is so obviously filmed just from random normal people with their random normal cameras means that it could be true, which is terrifying. The fact that it gives you a migraine when you watch it also adds to the horror. 1999, The Sixth Sense. The one thing that I think M. Night Shyamalan actually did well. Congrats to you for making a true psychological kind of detective-y thriller where you're trying to figure out what's going on, why can this boy see ghosts, and what happened to the main character. Of course, once you actually see it, you will never be able to unknow the twist and every single rewatching is just boring, but for that first time you see it, it really is really surprising. Maybe it was the fact that I saw it when I was a child, but I was shocked by the twist. And if anyone spoils the twist for The Sixth Sense to someone who has legitimately not seen it to this day and age, there is a special place in hell for you. 1999, Audition, a wonderful Japanese horror movie directed by Takashi Miike. It has a Misery-esque plot with a femme fatale wanting to enact holy vengeance on all the men who have wronged her, but she goes about it in a very Jigsaw-esque manner that will make everybody curl up in the fetal position and just you feel everything that's done in this movie, and it's definitely a hide your face behind your hands kind of flick. 2001, Trouble Every Day. Directed by Claire Denis, this French take on the vampire genre leads more into the horrors of relationship abuse than the actual vampire genre. It's definitely worth a look for anyone who wants to see the gritty, moody, French, you're all going to die and be sad and lonely when it happens take on the horror franchise. 2001, The Devil's Backbone. Directed by Guillermo del Toro, it features a small child in the Spanish Civil War, and it's not Pan's Labyrinth. This involves a haunting at an orphanage, and mainly, even though yes, the haunting is a massive factor in the movie, deals with the horrors that children have to go through in a war. Thank you, Guillermo del Toro, for hitting us over the head with this theme. We can tell that you dislike war. 2004, Saw. Directed by James Wan, and James Wan can go jump off a cliff for inventing this franchise. I hate this franchise. You know why I hate this franchise? Because things like this have actually happened to real people. We will discuss this in a later episode, but I hate horror movies that feature things that are actually realistic. You don't believe me? Look up Madame Lalaurie in New Orleans. It's a thing that has happened. This is a thing that has happened, and I absolutely hate it. Why? 2005, Corpse Bride. Thank you for getting us onto something that's slightly rosier. Yes, this movie isn't really scary, and yes, it's kind of meant for children, but the reason it's on this list is, once again, the animation standpoint. Anything that features claymation just deserves a shout out for the amount of work that goes into it, but it is mainly a revenge story, paired with the oppressive nature of living in this time period, which I'm guessing is Victorian era England. They never really put a date on it, but all of the characters are just forced to live out predetermined lives. The only bit of freedom they have is when they die. It's a very interesting thematic take on death and life, and it just is a joyous, delightful movie. And fun fact, Bojangles, at least I think that's what the character's name is Danny Elfman. For the same reason that he sings Jack Skellington, he couldn't find someone who would sing the Remains of the Day song to his liking, so he just did it his own damn self. Good on you, Danny Elfman. I absolutely adore you. You can do whatever you want. 2006, Monster House. Directed by Gil Keenan, this completely CG movie, the only one on this list, is a very interesting It-esque plot involving children saving the day from the titular Monster House. It's a very surprising take on the haunted house genre, and it features a theme of prejudice. If you've never seen the movie, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but it was a staple in my childhood, and even as an adult, I would say it's worth a watch. 2008, Martyrs. Directed by Pascal Guier, is part of the French extremity movement, and boy is this thing gory. It has a lot of shock value in it, and for anyone who has the guts, well, I hope you enjoy it, because whew. 2008, Let the Right One In. At the same time Twilight was hitting the nation, what a wonderful time in our lives that was, Thomas Alfredson was coming out with this movie. It is a Swedish film. It is beautiful. It is beautifully shot. The cinematography, the color palette, the everything about this movie is just stunning. It involves a bullied child and his vampire friend and all the lovely ways that can go wrong. It's just you look at it and you want to cry. It's very European, and 2009, Coraline. Directed by Henry Selick, the same guy that directed Nightmare Before Christmas. Surprisingly though, this is not a Tim Burton film and Danny Elfman isn't in it. But that's fine because this movie is phenomenal. It reminds me a little bit of Spirited Away in the fact that the little girl has to save her parents, but instead of from a fairy tale witch, she needs to save them from a terrifying fairy tale witch. For any of you who know a little bit about the movie, the other mother is called a beldam. The beldam is actually an Old English word for witch and was a real mythological creature. It would live in the woods, it would be in the form of a spider creature, and it would eat children. Neil Gaiman actually based a book off of it, and that is what this movie is based off of, which is why I think it stands a little bit above movies like Nightmare Before Christmas and Corpse Bride, because it was built off of this very Roald Dahl-esque fairy tale novel thing. It has a real basis of folklore into it, which is why I think it's just so real and grounded and absolutely terrifying. This is one of my absolute favorite movies. I watch it multiple times a year. 2011, The Skin I Live In. This Spanish film is directed by Pedro Almodovar, and it's based off of a novel called Tarantula by Thierry Jonquière. I'm so sorry. The interesting thing about this movie is that, well, you know how Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs would mess with people's skin? The protagonist of this movie does that too, except the skin's still on the people. So, yeah. Enjoy. 2014, The Babadook. Directed by Jennifer Kent, this Australian film on the surface seems to be about the demon that's haunting this poor family, but it actually is about guilt. It's an interesting theming choice that if you've ever seen the film, I'm not going to delve into too much because it's really worth you have to experience this. I watched the movie with my brother because I was too chicken shit to do by myself. That Babadook looking thing is really creepy. 2014, It Follows. It's a movie about STDs. That's all you need to know. Directed by David Robert Mitchell, it takes the whole someone's behind you trope and really just pushes it up to 11. Although I am kind of laughing at the demon for not being able to get above a brisk walk, the menacing slow stroll it takes after these really dumb kids is slightly creepy, but also it's a movie about STDs, so just wear a condom and you're fine. 2017, Get Out. Jordan Peele, you mad genius. If you've never seen this movie, what is wrong with you? The wonderful thing about this movie is that if you have never seen any of the trailers, you'll go into it thinking it's a movie about racism, and then the moment will gut punch you. If you have seen the trailers to know that it's a horror movie, you'll go into it just waiting for that shoe to drop, waiting for the moment when the horror kicks in. It is such a good movie. It's about racism, obviously, but also psychological horror and just the entrapment that people can feel. And it has a twist that I at least never saw coming. And fun fact, they actually had another ending planned, but at the very last minute decided to not do that specific ending. Again, I don't want to spoil it, but I would recommend looking up the Get Out alternate ending, and I'm fairly sure you will also understand why it was a awful idea, and it's so good that they didn't do that. And finally, 2017 to 2019's It. I really like this movie. I cannot even begin to decipher if the older ones are better than the newer ones because, oh boy, Andre Muschietti, you beautiful, beautiful bitch. The newer movies are stunning. Now let's give some love to the original director, Tommy Lee Wallace, because those originals are still amazing, and it is the reason why 99% of all of our parents hate clowns, and the newer ones are going to be the reason why 99% of us hate clowns too. I, for one, love Pennywise, and I float too. What more can I say about it? It's it, and it's great, and you should all see it, and I'm trying to say the word it as many times as I can you tell? And that concludes my epically long, kind of unnecessarily thorough list on the most influential horror movies as far as I'm concerned. I know I'm missing a couple, but come on, after 56 my brain hurts. I did try to include some films that no one would know about, and my criteria was more than just did I enjoy watching them. I wanted to include trailblazers in their genre, ones with interesting technological achievements and very thought-provoking plots and themes. And I hope that if there's a couple of movies on this list that pique your interest, you will watch them during your special October movie nights. Next we'll be going into the different types of horror, mainly focusing on plausible and non-plausible storylines. So things that could happen to you and things that can't. So Saw versus It. I'm also planning on doing a couple more Halloween makeup things for enjoyment, I guess, since trick-or-treating is out and so is parties, but nothing says that you can't spookify yourself and just walk around your house scaring your houseplants. So I will see you on our next movie night.